T. Well, this thing has really come off, you know, and everything is falling. Oh, you got. So, you know, I'm proud that everything has turned out the way it has. A lot of people have fallen through. So you just never know until you try something whether it'll work or not. This is a workable program. We're hoping that if we can be successful, make an annual thing out of it. People in the community and showing a lot of interest, and a lot of people interested, we're certainly interested. And do y'all have anything to add to that, LC?
The only thing I'd like to say is right here we're getting everybody that took part in this thing is signing this thing rather than trying to put everybody, Ms. Linville, that painted the sign for it, rather than her put everything on the sign, everybody's name on the sign herself. Just let individuals sign it, and then if you didn't sign it, you hadn't got no right. So that's what we're doing part is signing the thing. Let's, if y'all not in any hurry, let's just hang around for a few minutes and see if some more people start coming in, and I think it will. And we'll go on up there and when we start unloading and sitting down.
We ought to have 1,000 of them. Because I believe it all sold. My name is Mike Vanderbilt, and I came to this place by a rather roundabout route. I was born in Michigan, raised in Ohio, and until I met my wife, I had very little interest in the state of Alabama or indeed the Civil War. My wife, she works in Birmingham. She lives in Birmingham, rather, and she's from Memphis. And I came to Alabama. We married, and I first encountered LaGrange on the road, which is Alabama 157. We repeatedly saw these signs. LaGrange College site this way. And after we'd passed them 3 or 4 times in as many months, I went up here and to see what this was all about. And I hadn't ever been particularly interested in the Civil War, but I knew enough about it to know that for a college and a town to be burned in this part of the country, there were standing orders that the Union Army had not to destroy civilian property. When the Union Army had been through here and if a slave ran away, it was applied to the local Yankee commander, and the Yankee commander would send out some troops and catch the slave for him and return it. The respect for private property extended to so it made me ask why, at this time, well before the Atlanta campaign, well before Sherman's March to the Sea, and the general acceptance of stuff, why was this town burned? That led me to Colonel Florence Cornyn and his commander Granville Dodge, and to the fact that Florence Cornyn, 3 months after he burned the town, was murdered by his own second-in-command at a court-martial in full view of 20 witnesses. And that Cornyn his second in command, a fellow named William D. Bowen, had argued on the main street of LaGrange the night it was burned. And I got to thinking that perhaps there was a link between LaGrange and why poor Colonel Cornyn ended up having 3 bullets put in him at point blank range. Now, the more I dug into it, the more I realized that our friend Colonel Cornyn here was a man of many parts. He was a doctor, son of Irish immigrants, born in Ohio, very well educated, although his father died at an early age in Michigan. In 1849, he went out to California to the gold fields and made enough money to come back and put himself through New York University School of Medicine. And then Lewis built up a very successful practice and became superintendent of the city hospital. When the war broke, Cornyn sided with the Union, was early men to side with the Union. He fought in all the early battles in Missouri as a doctor, but he was never quite content with treating patients. He would reach a man who had been wounded, and before treating him would pick up his gun and fire back at the enemy. He got the nickname of the fighting doctor. And at Shiloh, another side of Cornyn came out. He was a very brave man. And the first day at Shiloh, which was a disaster for the Union, the Confederacy came very close to shoving back into the Tennessee River. He very early that forgot his Hippocratic oath and served as an artilleryman, first with one battery, then another, helping them load. At one point, he even took a section of guns out in front of the Union line to fire into the Confederate flank as they were attacking the Hornets' Nest. A very foolhardy thing to do, but he did it. He was mentioned with distinction in one of the general's reports, but after a certain point, even that general lost track of him because he too retreated. But Cornyn didn't retreat. He found a couple of guns that had been abandoned for lack of horses and some ammunition, and he collected a scratch force of volunteers to serve those guns. And for at least a half hour, he alone kept the Confederate right flank away from the landing. And because everyone else had retreated, he was never really given it. But he was undoubtedly one of the unsung heroes of the Union Army in Shiloh. When he finally went back after the guns had been blown to pieces, the caissons destroyed, the ground littered with dead and dying, he finally went back to the river. And he spent the next weeks doctoring wounded. But something at Shiloh changed him, and he resigned his surgeon's commission. He went back to St. Louis and accepted the colonelcy of the 10th Missouri Cavalry, Union Cavalry outfit, and to Corinth, Mississippi, and then finally to the Tennessee Valley. You see, Grenville Dodge, they misspelled the old codger's name on the monument, but Grenville Dodge was a commander. He had a very difficult problem. Corinth was, by that time in the war, an isolated place. The main armies were farther east and north in Tennessee and farther west and south over towards Vicksburg, and in between is land full of guerrillas. And Corinth was a bastion in the Dodge was plagued by Confederate guerrillas who drew their supplies from the Tennessee Valley below here. And Dodge determined that one good way to get rid of those guerrillas was to destroy their base of supply. The old thing, how do you fight guerrillas who swim like fish in the sea? You drain the ocean. And that's what Dodge determined to do with the Tennessee Valley. He sent Cornyn out in a series of raids into this area to destroy Confederate civilian and military property. And, in a nice twist, he also had Cornyn steal all of the money that he could find and everything else that wasn't nailed down. Now, the money that Cornyn's men took, they took back to Dodge and gave it to him personally. And Dodge accepted this money and claimed that he was using it to fund spies. Well, as to get Dodge to account for the money, Dodge refused. He said that if I tell you who the spies are operating in Confederate territory, soon the rebels will know, and they'll all be killed. So I'm giving them this money, and surprisingly enough, he was able to get away with it. So Cornyn was collecting all of this money, giving it to Dodge. Dodge was using it for espionage, supposedly. He claimed he had 100 spies, and I can only find evidence that he had 4 or 5. The question is then, what did he do with the money that he claimed he was funding the other 95 for? One point will probably clear it all up. When Dodge entered the Army in 1861, he was a bankrupt man. He had made a poor choice of business partners, and his family was relying on the charity of friends. He was broke when he joined the Union Army. He stayed in the Union Army after the war until late 1866, and yet his account by 1868 made him, the question is, how did a man who was bankrupt in 1861 and had spent almost the entire decade in the Union Army become one of the richest men in Iowa? Cornyn got him the money. And thereby hangs a clue to Cornyn's murder. Because you see, eventually, all of this unauthorized destruction got out, and it got to be public knowledge. It got to be the subject of several sordid newspaper articles. Even back then, that was something to be feared. And Dodge issued a number of orders against this destruction, but he also issued private orders to Cornyn to carry it out. And finally, the publicity got so great that Dodge was forced to court-martial Cornyn for exceeding orders. Well, he had been ordered by Dodge, and if anyone should be court-martialed, it should be Dodge. Cornyn was apparently well on the way to proving his case when one morning during the trial, they adjourned. Bowen, who had always stayed away from him because he well knew Cornyn's temper and had never put himself at risk of Cornyn whipping the tar out of him, because Cornyn, although much smaller than Bowen, was very feisty. And Bowen had argued with him, it's true, but he never put him within reach of the colonel's fist or his sword. But this day, something was different, because he walked up to Cornyn, he picked a fight with Cornyn right there in the court-martial anteroom, and once he got Cornyn to swing on him, Cornyn did tear him to pieces. He knocked him against a table and was wailing the tar out of him when they were separated by a couple of the onlookers. Bowen reached down and undid his service revolver and very, very calmly shot him to death. Cornyn was supposed to be unarmed at the time, being the accused. He had a pistol concealed on him, but he was never able to reach it. He had been grabbed at the moment Bowen pulled his pistol by a man who had come in from the other room and had not seen Bowen pull his pistol. And so Cornyn's arms were being held tightly behind him when Bowen fired the first shot and the second shot. And the fourth shot Bowen delivered while standing directly over Cornyn in a hallway, just like this. There was no doubt that it was at least first-degree murder, that it was premeditated. But Bowen was put on trial for murder and acquitted a month later. Bowen expected to go back to his unit. The verdict was just not understandable to General Hurlbut, who was Dodge's immediate superior, and course, Hurlbut was also the fellow who asked Dodge to account for the spy money, and Dodge refused. Dodge wasn't one of Hurlbut's favorites anyway, and he looked at the court-martial record and he said, there is no way that this man is not guilty of murder, and since he's already been tried and found innocent, I can't retry him for the crime of murder, but I'm going to keep him in jail until I can find something that I can charge him with. And one thing I left out, Bowen was an early war associate of Dodge's, and he may have even been a friend of Dodge's. I know that he gave Dodge a stolen horse when Dodge was commander out in Rolla, Missouri. And there was a corruption. Bowen participated. That's another entirely different story. But Bowen was a thief, no doubt. Dodge was a thief, probably. And Cornyn was an honest man caught in the middle who ended up dead. Cornyn, who might have proved his innocence at that court-martial, well, the court-martial transcript disappeared. It's not in the National Archives, it's gone. And the records of about a half a dozen other court-martials that pertain to the same subject of different men also disappeared. Dodge apparently had them disappeared. And Bowen stayed in jail for another year, finally thrown out of the Army by the Ulysses S. Grant. But Cornyn was dead. They took his body back to St. Louis, and they buried him there under a monument that's, I guess, twice as tall as this, extremely impressive. Has a carved bronze relief of his face in the front of it. You can see every detail of his face, from the broken nose that he got in the California goldfield. And Cornyn, who, because of the job that he's been given by Dodge, jokingly called his troops the Destroying Angels, Cornyn has always been known as the Destroying Angel, and has always been viewed as a kind of boogeyman around. But the truth is that the real destroyer, and that Cornyn was simply an honest guy who tried to carry out orders, and when he was finally in danger of implicating his commanding officer, he was murdered.